we will get started tonight. We're going to be in John chapter 2, if you would like to turn there. John chapter 2. Tonight, we get to begin a brand new Bible study. And we're going to begin a series on the miracles of Jesus. And as we get ready to do this, I think there are a few questions we need to consider, and you can see some of those on your sheet. But I am excited for this series. Let me just kind of preface everything tonight by telling you I'm excited for this series. I enjoyed our We Believe series. It was good. I enjoyed doing it a lot, but that was a lot of work. Getting ready for each Wednesday night on that, there was so much preparation that went into that, and it is kind of nice to be able to turn back and just kind of get in a mode of focusing on a single scripture. And in this case, we're going to look at individual accounts of some of the miracles of Jesus and just dive into those and really see what we can learn and see some things from those miracles that we can hopefully apply to our lives. So I'm looking forward to it as a change of pace from what we've been doing, and so looking forward to it. So as we get into this, though, before we dive into the miracles themselves, I do think there are a few questions we need to consider. And the first question that you can see on your sheet is, what is a miracle? What is a miracle? Some people would wrongly argue that a miracle is a point in time where God intervenes in the world. So in other words, some people would make the argument and say a miracle is just the moment when God chooses to come and intervene in the world. And there is a problem with that definition. If we use that definition, it conveys the false idea that God only intervenes in our world on certain occasions. And we don't believe that. If you go back to our We Believe series, we believe that God is involved in the everyday affairs of this world. And so that definition doesn't quite fit. So how would we define, or how should we define a miracle? I'm going to give you two examples, and we're not going to use those examples, and then I'll give you our definition we're going to work with in just a moment here. The first example of a good definition of a miracle is this. A miracle happens, Erwin Lutzer said, a miracle happens when God, who is continuously active in the world, breaks his usual pattern and does something extraordinary. All right? That sounds like a good definition, right? And it is a good definition, but I don't think it's the best definition. Let me give you another example of a definition of a miracle. John G. Butler put it this way. He said, the miracles of Christ, he got more specific, the miracles of Christ are supernatural acts caused by the will of Jesus Christ, which contrast to and interrupt the way in which life ordinarily functions. There's a whole lot there. But for us, I think the best definition would be this one from the Lexham Bible Dictionary. And that is this. And I hope you can read the underlining. I was trying to find a good font color for this, for the underlining of the words. If you're not sure, I'll try and tell it. All right. It is an event that defies common expectations of behavior and subsequently is attributed to a superhuman agent. I didn't realize I'd put two blanks and I only underlined the one on there. But it's an event that defies common expectations of behavior, and because it defies those expectations, it is then attributed to a superhuman agent. All right, so using that definition, that brings us to our second question. Are all miracles of God? You see, that's the problem with the first two definitions I had read you. They assumed that all miracles come from God. Do all miracles come from God? I want you to understand that not everything that is miraculous comes from God. To put it simply, miracles come from one of two sources. Either they are based on Jesus Christ and the Bible, or they are based on demonic and occultic activity. All right, they come from one of those two places. The miracles Jesus performed were all intended to lead people to believe on him. But do you realize, and do we understand, that Satan also performs events that defy common expectations? Right? Absolutely. He does things all the time that defy common expectations, and those same miracles are meant to draw people to him. So, as we look at the miracles of Jesus, it's interesting that you will notice that never once do Jesus' enemies ever deny the miracles he performed. No one ever went up to Jesus and said, "I don't believe you did that miracle." No one ever argued whether he actually performed them. Instead, the argument was not about whether he did them or didn't do them. The argument was about, where did the power to do it come from? Did it come from God or did it come from Satan? Who was behind the miracle? But they never argued about whether the miracle really took place. So, that brings us to this next question. Why did Jesus perform miracles? There was always a twofold purpose to the miracles that Jesus performed. The first purpose was quite simply just to help someone in need. To help someone in need. Now, it's important to remember that Jesus didn't just go around performing miracles for the fun of it. He didn't do it to show off in front of everyone, like the kid on his bike in front of mama saying, "Hey, Ma, look, no hands," right? He wasn't doing this to try to impress people. Every single miracle he did had the focused purpose of helping someone in need. But it was more than just helping someone in need. It went far beyond that. It always had a deeper meaning than just to help someone. The second, because the primary purpose of every miracle was to authenticate his message. The purpose of these miracles, yes, he wanted to help people in need, but ultimately, these miracles were meant to authenticate his message. God uses these miracles to get our attention so that we look beyond the miracle to see the miracle worker. Think about it, if Christ's only purpose in working miracles had been just to help people in need, then thousands more would have been healed. Yes, Jesus wanted to help those in need, but he wanted to do it in a way that showed that he was exactly who he said he was, that he was the Son of God, God in the flesh. Now, depending on what commentator you read behind, there are anywhere between 33 and 40 miracles in the New Testament. Why does that number vary? Well, for instance, some commentators include the events at Calvary in their listing. And so there are different ways of trying to add up the various miracles, but there are a minimum of 33, a maximum of about 40. We could probably put that number right around 35. The reality is that not a single gospel, none of the gospels, contain every recorded miracle of Jesus. If you want to see all the miracles, you've got to have all 4 gospel accounts. And Scripture also makes it clear that Jesus performed many more miracles than what the 4 gospels even tell us. Some of these miracles that we see, they are recorded in all 4 gospels, but there are some that are found in as few as just 1 gospel. So as I said last week, we are not going to look at all 35 miracles. We're not going to go through all the miracles, but we are going to select a few over the coming weeks and go through them and see some things that we can take out of that. So with all of that intro out of the way, let's look at our first miracle. And there's no place to start when you're talking about Jesus' miracles you have to start at the first miracle, right? You got to start with Jesus turning water into wine. So, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Let's go ahead and read through the account, and then we'll come back and dive into the parts of it. John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This is the beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, so the story of Jesus' first miracle. I guess I need to flip this over, don't I? There we go. The story of Jesus' miracle begins with the words, "on the third day." There's a lot of debate about this. We're not going to dive deep into it. The third day from what? And it's amazing to me that people actually get all caught up and concerned about counting how many days. Where is this going from? Is it the third day from when John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the river? Is it the third day from when Nathanael was called to be a disciple? What is this the third day from? It's not of super great importance, okay, as to which one it is. I don't believe the text is clear enough to be dogmatic on any stance, although I have seen some people try to put their foot down and say, this is what it is. There's no doubt about it. All right? The point made here by this phrasing of "on the third day," I don't think is meant to get us to count the specific days and to say, okay, this is the third day from this. The point here is if you go back to John chapter 1, we see John telling a story. And on one day, this happens. The next day, something else happens. Then, on the next day, another event happens. And now we come to John chapter 2, and he says, "on the third day." Okay, so the point is, this is a full continuation of the story that John has already been telling. Jesus has already begun assembling his disciples. He's given us a sequence of events that takes place right after Jesus has called his first disciples: Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, and Nathanael. And so that is what is going on here when we see this on the third day. Now, what is the setting? Listen, I think most of us in here, we're very familiar with this miracle, but the setting, as we know, is a wedding in Cana. Let's read verses 1 and 2 again. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So when we look at the setting, we understand there's this wedding taking place in Cana. There are a few things to keep in mind about the setting here of this miracle. In Jesus' day, Jewish wedding celebrations weren't just a simple one-day affair. Instead, a Jewish wedding ceremony was a week-long event, and it included 3 major events. I didn't put them on your sheet, but it was a week-long affair that included 3 major events. Now, aren't you glad, men, ladies, that in our modern-day setting, your wedding wasn't just stretched out from one day, that it was just a single day. It wasn't stretched out to a week-long celebration. Can you imagine paying for that? That would be fun. So understand, there were these three major events. There was, first of all, there was a marriage feast and a ceremony which were held on the same evening. So it begins with the marriage feast and the ceremony. All right? So then there was the escort of the couple through the streets to their home. So you leave your marriage feast, you leave your marriage ceremony, and you begin your escort back to the street, back to your home through the streets. And understand, this wedding procession from the ceremony back to your home that you have prepared, it usually took place at night with flaming torches being used as they took the longest route to your house they possibly could, so that everybody would know what was going on, and so that there was plenty of opportunity for everyone to realize there's a wedding celebration taking place. I think back to our modern times. Most of us, once we get the wedding over, we're taking the quickest way we can to get to our honeymoon, right? All right, but no, they're going to take the longest route they can to get back to, I guess, to the wedding reception, if you want to call it that in our terms. But then, after they get back to the house, there was the open house, which now lasted for a week. So you don't get to go on that honeymoon. A Jewish wedding ceremony, it involved a large, long celebration. And so you have that wedding ceremony, and then suddenly you've got all your guests at your house for a week. Isn't that how you envision your wedding night going? All right. So, but understand, this is their culture, this is their society, and it was a happy, festive spirit. The whole community normally joined in when a wedding took place. It was a party atmosphere all week. Y'all are going to love this. All week, the couple would wear their wedding garments and entertain their guests. You want to stay in that wedding dress all week long? Oh, goodness. So understand, this is the setting. This is what's going on. It is a party that's going to last a week. All right? Now, another part of this setting is that Mary, Jesus' mother, was there. I find it interesting the way it's phrased. It says, and the mother of Jesus was there. She was already there. She was there, and most commentators believe that she was actually very much a part of this wedding, that she was very likely one of the ones helping with the planning of this wedding, carrying out and assisting in it, which most people believe meant that this was for some type of family member. Who knows? But it's interesting that as we read this, there is no mention of Joseph here, is there? Joseph's not here. It's believed by most commentators that Joseph has likely been dead for some time at this point, and Jesus, being the oldest child, had become the de facto head of the family, if you will. And so Mary is already there, performing whatever function she is, helping with this wedding ceremony and this week-long event. Then we come to the third part of the setting, and that is that Jesus and his disciples were invited to attend. You see, that's where I see the difference. Mary was already there. Mary wasn't invited. Mary was there. Mary seems to have been a part of this. And then Jesus and his disciples, they get an invitation to come and, hey, come join the festivities. Now, the fact that Jesus went to this wedding, I believe, is significant. And it sets the tone for a lot of his ministry. Now, a lot of people will point out that Jesus attending this wedding, that it is meant to show Jesus and the approval of marriage and all of that. And yes, we know Jesus approves of marriage, and I don't think we need to get into it that way. But I think his attendance at this wedding celebration is significant for another reason. Because Warren Wiersbe put it this way. He said, our Lord was not a recluse. In other words, he wasn't a hermit like John the Baptist. He accepted invitations to social events, even though his enemies used that practice to accuse him. I find that interesting about Jesus. Jesus was a sociable person. He liked people, and people actually liked him. And so he enjoyed being around people. In other words, Jesus wasn't like me. He wasn't an antisocial introvert who just wanted to stay home. No, Jesus wanted to be out with people. He was a people person, and his ministry clearly focused on people, on being with people and helping people. And so I think that's one of the things we can take away from this. Jesus received that invitation, and his first response, hey guys, let's go. Let's go to the wedding, and let's go party it up a little bit. Can you picture Jesus say, let's go party it up a little bit? Yeah. All right. So we see the setting. That brings us to verse 3, where we now turn to Mary's request. Verse 3, and when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Now we see two things revealed in this verse. First, we see that there was a serious problem. This isn't just a minor problem. It's not just a little blip on the radar. This is a serious problem. To us, this statement that they ran out of wine doesn't seem like a very big deal. But keep in mind what I said. The celebration is supposed to last a week, and this celebration had just begun. The wine is expected to last the entire week-long celebration. And here they are on night one, and they're already out of wine. And as I said, we're given the impression that Mary had a hand in the planning and the carrying out of this celebration. So for her, she knew this was a major issue. And here's why it was a major problem. In those days, to run out of any appropriate and necessary plies was a major embarrassment to the bride, to the groom, to the family. It was an embarrassment to everyone involved. And to run out of the wine was especially egregious. They would have had shame heaped upon them for years because of this. But it goes even beyond that, because from what we understand from Jewish custom at the time, if they ran out of wine, their guests, some of them actually had the right to bring a lawsuit against them because they had not properly supplied for the celebration. You get why Mary's a little upset about this? I mean, she's kind of got a hand in this. She's got a little something at stake in this, but no matter what, this family is about to suffer some serious shame, some serious embarrassment, and possibly even some very dire financial consequences. This is a major problem. And so this young couple is facing a disaster just as they're starting out in life together. And if this isn't resolved and done so quickly, it's going to be a major problem. And so Mary, she finds out about the problem before all the rest of the guests. And so what does Mary do? Mary turned to Jesus. Mary turned to Jesus. What was Mary asking Jesus to do? Notice what she said. She said, all she does is she comes to him and says, they have no wine. There's kind of a question implicit there, right? We're not told what the question is. We're not told what does Mary want Jesus to do. We're not given the actual idea of what she wants. And there is a lot of debate as to why Mary brought this matter to Jesus. There are several beliefs and theories that are put out there as to why she brought it to Jesus. Some people say that she brought this to Jesus because she was warning him, like, hey, Jesus, they just ran out of wine. You might want to go ahead and get out. You might want to go ahead and leave before things get bad because it's about to go down. There are some people who believe that. I don't believe that. There are others who believe, and I had never heard this, but this is an interesting idea. Others have said that Mary sees this moment as the opportunity to fix not just the problem of the wine, but for Jesus to vindicate her own reputation. Let's remember how Jesus came into this world, born of a virgin, right? We know he was born of a virgin. We know that Mary was a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus. But what did the rest of society believe about Mary? They believed she was a fornicator, right? There was no thought that God did this. As far as they were concerned, Jesus was an illegitimate child. And so Mary, for 30 years, has lived with the ridicule for a sin she did not do, for getting pregnant before marriage. Remember how the Pharisees smugly declared to Jesus, they said to him, "We were not born of fornication," implying Jesus was. So some people believe that this was Mary asking Jesus, hey, won't you go ahead and just do something supernatural and finally show people who you really are so that I can finally have people recognize that I wasn't lying this whole time. Now, it's a great theory, and there might be a little bit of truth to that. And it's possible, but I don't think that's what she was really seeking in this moment. Because up until now, Jesus had never performed any miracles. We understand that because verse 11 says, this beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. Listen, contrary to what other religions may teach and what other non-canonical, is that even right, the word? Non-canon books. In spite of what those claim, where they pretend and try to claim that, oh, Jesus as a little boy was running around doing little miracles, whatever, just doing whatever. Listen, John is very clear. The beginning of signs started right here. Mary's never seen Jesus do any miracles, so I don't think she's seeking for him to do the supernatural in this moment. Instead, I think the simplest solution is the best solution. She had a problem. And so who did she turn to for help? She turned to Jesus, her son, to see if he could help in any way possible. With Joseph gone, Jesus was her only option. Maybe she thought by going to Jesus that he and his disciples might go out in town and search for a shop where they could get to open and temporarily buy some wine to help alleviate this problem. Maybe that's what they thought. Either way, the problem was dire, and she goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, we've got a problem. And she does it in a somewhat authoritative way, but either way, there is a potential catastrophe, and Mary chose to turn to the only person she believed could help her in this family. That brings us to Jesus' response to his mother in verse 4. Verses 4 and 5. Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." All right, what does Jesus respond to his mother? Let me show you two things Jesus does here in this response. First, he gives a gentle rebuke. It is a rebuke, but it's a gentle rebuke. In the first century, it was appropriate to refer to a woman by the designation of her father, her husband, or her son, depending on who was responsible for her. Notice that in this gospel, she is never called Mary. She's never named by name. She's only referred to as the mother of Jesus or his mother. Jesus, understand, the gospel writer John understands something important. Jesus didn't get his significance from Mary. She got hers from him. Then we come to verse 4 and we read Jesus call his own mother woman. And when we hear that, we're immediately taken a little back by it, right? Because none of us can imagine ever going up to our mom and saying, "Hey, woman." That's a great way to get a slap in the face, right? Okay, to us, we can't even fathom doing such a thing. But the term he used was a common term, and it wasn't a disrespectful term. In fact, remember, he uses this exact same term when he is dying on the cross. And he tenderly looks at his mother and he says, "Woman, here's John." And he commends his mother into John's care. Same term. So understand, this term, while it's not the all-reverent term of mother, it is a respectful term. And there was nothing wrong with him using it, but he rebukes her. The second thing he does is he sets new parameters to his relationship with his mother. He sets some new parameters. For many years, Mary had raised Jesus to be her son. Listen, those of you that have been parents, you understand the challenge of watching your children grow up and eventually move out of the house and they become their own person, and that relationship changes, doesn't it? You can't be that same parent you were when they were the little 5-year-old. Understand, Jesus is now going, not just saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm a 30-year-old man. You can't just come tell me what to do." This is going far beyond that. Jesus is now about to clarify, hey, our relationship is not just different as a mother and son. Our relationship is different in that I am God and you are in need of me as God. So instead of calling her mother, it distinguishes that he is much more than her son. That's part of why he uses that word woman. This isn't about Mary as his mother anymore. If we were to translate the words literally, it would say this: "Woman, what to me and to you? My hour has not yet come." Jesus in this moment saw an opportunity to help his mother begin to see that their relationship was different than she thought. He was the Son of God who had entered the world for a particular hour. He had come for a single moment. He had come for the cross. Mary couldn't view Jesus as every other mother viewed their sons. Jesus was different. His purpose was different. Therefore, at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus began to teach everyone, including the person who was so dear to his heart, his mother, that this was the moment to begin preparing her and others for the pain that would one day come during this hour that he had come for. He was the Son of God. He had been born of God. Thus, he had to be busy with the work of God, not with whatever Mary needed, not with whatever Mary thought was important. Mary needed to begin to see and to understand this. By the way, don't miss the theological significance of verse 5. Verse 5 are Mary's last recorded words in Scripture. In those words, what do we see Mary doing? She's directing the servants to who? To her son Jesus. She's directing her servants to Jesus rather than acting as a mediator or a liaison for him. Listen, for those who believe they need to go through Mary to have their prayers heard or to gain influence in heaven, haven't studied the relationship between Jesus and his mother very carefully. Mary did not carry a whole lot of weight with Jesus. He loved her. He cared for her, even when he was dying on the cross. But he was not influenced by her, nor did he take orders from her. Remember in Luke 8, when Jesus was told his mother wanted to come and to see him, Jesus responded and said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? But those who hear and heed the word of God." Later, we see in Acts chapter 1, Mary is there with the disciples praying in the upper room. Who's leading the meeting? It's not Mary. She's not in a place of prominence or honor in this meeting. She's just present. Why? Because there is only one mediator between God and man, and it's not Mary. As 1 Timothy 2:5 says, it is the man Christ Jesus. That is one of the things we can take from this verse. All right, moving on. We see Jesus' response to his mother. Now comes the time. He's kind of helped Mary and others begin to see he's here for a different purpose. He's not here just to fulfill whatever it is that she's wanting to have fulfilled. He has an hour to come. There is a moment coming for him, and everything is leading to that. But this is not exactly that moment. And so Jesus is going to perform a miracle, but not quite like everyone might think he would. So let's look at Jesus' miracle beginning in verse 6. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. All right, so there were 6 stone water pots that were used by the people who were attending the wedding. And these water pots were used for ceremonial washing, which according to Jewish customs, people's hands had to be washed before a meal. So understand, these 6 water pots are the water pots everybody comes and cleans their hands in. All right? And they hold about 20 to 30 gallons, depending on the size of the pot. So together, these 6 stone water pots held about 120 to 180 gallons. Now, there are all kinds of applications we could make about these water pots, and we're not going to take the time to do that tonight. But I want to focus for a moment instead of focusing on the water pots, I want to focus on the servants in this part of the miracle. Jesus could have made this miracle happen all on his own, right? Jesus could have just snapped his fingers and immediately caused a whole bunch of wine to appear out of nowhere. Could he have done that? Yeah, if he wanted to, he could have caused wine to rain down from heaven. He could have fulfilled this need any way he wanted to. Instead, he chose to use some simple servants. That should be a lesson to us just right there. God wants to reach this world with the gospel. And God will, whether we choose to do what he's called us to do or not. But he wants to use us as his simple servants. That's his desire. All right. So, as we read what took place between Jesus and the servants, I think there are a few quick things that if we're going to serve Jesus, if we're going to be used by him in accomplishing great things in this world, I think there are 3 things we can see from these servants in these verses that'll help us. So, we need to serve in 3 ways. What are they? First, we need to serve obediently. Serve obediently. Notice when Jesus tells them to fill the stone pots with water, these stone pots that are used for cleansing, he says, all right, these pots that everybody has cleaned their hands in, they're probably nastified now. That's my guess. He says, I want you to take those pots and fill them with water. There's no arguments, are there? Nobody says, hey, Jesus, are you sure about that? That's kind of weird. These pots have kind of gotten a little dirty because everybody's cleaned their hands in them. Nobody said, hey, Jesus, are you sure you want us to put water in them? You sure you don't want us to go buy some wine or go find some wine? You just want us to do this. They don't do any of that. They don't question. They don't talk back. They simply do exactly what he asks them to do. How often do we want to question and argue with God instead of simply obeying him? See, that's what God's looking for. He's looking for simple obedience. He doesn't need us to question and argue when we don't understand what he's telling us to do. When what he's saying doesn't make sense. We just need to obey. So we need to serve obediently. Secondly, we need to serve exuberantly. Serve exuberantly. Notice it says the servants didn't just obey him and fill the pots. No, what did they do? They filled these huge jars all the way up to the brim. Remember, these guys didn't have a water hose. to run over to the pots and just run the water hose filling them up. They had to do a whole lot of work going back and forth to the well to get these pots full. I imagine that some of us, if we had been there, would have looked and it might have been up close to the top and we'd have said, all right, that's full. I'm not making another trip just to get it to do any more. It's full. I would call that full. Would you call that full? I call it full. They didn't stop there. They said, he told us to fill them. We're going to keep making these trips until it's basically overflowing. We're going to fill that joker all the way to the brim. And that's what they did. Listen, they didn't know what was coming next, but there was nothing half-hearted about what they did. Jesus said to do it. They said, okay, we're going to do it all the way. If we're going to do it, let's do it, and let's do it right, and do it as far as we can possibly do it. Man, that's a lesson we need to learn in the church. Some of us, we question and we argue and we fail to obey. But some of us, when we start to obey, we obey with the question still in our mind, well, just how far do I have to do this? What's a good point where I can just stop and that's good enough? And the servant said, no, we're going to do it all the way. Let's serve exuberantly. Thirdly, we need to serve patiently. You notice how before this happens, Jesus doesn't get them all together in a little huddle and say, okay, guys, come join the huddle. Here's what we're going to do. Step 1, we're going to go grab these 6 water pots. Step 2, we're going to go start getting water from the well. Step 3, we're going to fill it all the way up to the brim. Step 4, we're going to dip some out of a cup, and we're going to take it to the master of the ceremonies. And step 5, somewhere along the way, this is going to become wine. He doesn't give them the whole plan, does he? He starts off with one simple command. Go get the water pots. They get the water pots. Then comes the next command. All right? Fill them with water. Doesn't tell them why. Doesn't tell them what's going to happen. And that's what we see here. Too many of us, we want to know all the steps before we'll commit to following step 1. Lord, just let me know where all this is going. And if I know where it's all going, then I'll obey and I'll do what you're asking me to. God, just let me see the big picture and I'll do whatever you say. But that's not how the Lord works. He unfolds his plan one step at a time. And we have to patiently but exuberantly obey. All right, so we see some great lessons from the servants in this. But now, let's look at the results of the miracle. Verses 9 through 11. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Somewhere between the water pots and the master of the feast, the water became wine. Jesus doesn't tell, we're not told when, how, where. It just became wine. Jesus did it with no one knowing. Let me give you this first result. The need was quietly met. The need was quietly met. Listen, we know this story well. Even people outside the church know this story. But at the time, the only one who knew what actually happened at this wedding were the lowliest people in attendance, the servants. They're the only ones that knew, them and Jesus' disciples. No one else knew where this new wine came from. There weren't any oohs or ahs as the wine was poured, like, oh, look, we just suddenly got this wine from nowhere. There wasn't a sudden rush of people to Jesus' side. Hey, Jesus, can we get your autograph? There were just a few servants and his disciples, who you can imagine are standing there with their jaws dropped and their eyes wide open as they listen to the master of the wedding say, hey, you brought out the best wine we've had all night. The time would soon come when Jesus would boldly demonstrate his authority in front of many. But on this night, he quietly met the need for just a few people to see. Now, the question that naturally comes up, and let me take a little rabbit trail here. The question that naturally comes up, did Jesus make alcoholic wine or did he make grape juice? The answer, we don't know. We don't know. We do need to make a distinction, though, between what we call wine and what they called wine. The wine they drank is different than the wine we have today. Understand that in their time, they did not distill their wine to make it more potent. In fact, they did just the opposite. They diluted their wine with 2 to 3 parts water to make the wine go further and to make it less potent. The word used here for wine can refer to any fruit of the vine, and it doesn't require it to be fermented. It actually refers to both fermented and unfermented. In fact, the process for this is they would take the juice from the fruit and they would preserve it by boiling it until it became a thick syrup. That thick syrup was then stored in new skin bottles. If the new wine was put into an old wineskin, then it would introduce fermentation to the wine. But what would happen is when it was time to have the wine, they would take the syrup and squeeze it out of the skin bottles, and it would be reconstituted as a drink by adding water. That is the wine that ultimately when you see wine referred to, that's what they're most of the time they are referring to. So understand that for people who want to use this passage to justify drinking alcohol, it distorts and twists the intended meaning. I'm not telling you, I don't think this passage teaches us one way or another about alcohol. There are other passages we can look at about that. But to use this passage is probably stretching it a bit too far. All right, secondly, so the need was quietly met. Secondly, Christ's glory was revealed. The Greek word translated sign occurs 77 times in the New Testament. And it is used to identify an act which calls for the exercise of supernatural power. This miracle story and all the miracle stories in the Bible, they confront us with the question of whether it was the power and glory of God that was revealed in the miracle and whether it was the power and glory of something else. The miracles compel us to answer either yes or no. Is the miracle of God? Is God's glory being revealed by Jesus in this miracle? Because it's either of God or it's of the devil. And so in this miracle, God's glory in Jesus Christ is just now beginning to be seen by a few select individuals. But very soon it'll be seen not by a few, but by many. Thirdly, his disciples' faith was strengthened. Ultimately, I think this is the main reason he did this miracle. This wasn't about, yes, he was helping the family in need. Yes, he was helping his mother. Yes, the servants suddenly were shocked and believed. But this was about the 6 men with him who had just started following him. John had declared, "Behold the Lamb who," what? "Takes away the sins of the world." And they had just started following him. They had just started understanding that this was the Messiah that they were coming to follow. And it was all new and exciting. And Jesus comes to this moment and he performs this miracle to help spur them in their belief. He had given them evidence that he was exactly who John said he was, that he was the Messiah. What that meant, they weren't sure. They walked away from this probably amazed, but they believed in him now. This wasn't just a, hey, let's come follow Jesus and let's see whether what John said is true. No, now their belief is real. Did you guys see what he just did? This has to be the Messiah. I'm all in now. I'm ready to follow and go wherever. So his disciples' faith was strengthened. All right, next week, we are going to look as Jesus heals the nobleman's son. All right, that'll be the miracle we look